You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
Many of us define ourselves and others by factors like where we live, what we do for a living, our appearance, or our physical abilities. But all of these factors can and do change. So how do we adjust to those changes, and how do we redefine ourselves? Today, I'm talking to yoga medicine teacher MacKenzie Kozlowski on the topic of change and transformation. Many of you will be familiar with MacKenzie, whether from meeting her in person at a yoga medicine training or from her pretty huge Instagram following. MacKenzie found yoga as a college student living in LA and did teacher training pretty quickly after that with Tiffany Cruikshank. Her beloved inversions, beautiful back bends, and deep hip openers, as well as her wicked sense of humor, made her pretty quickly a bit of an Instagram celebrity. And she was soon traveling the world, running workshops literally all over the globe. But it seems like she's never been afraid of change, because within a few years, she was married to Mike, a farmer living in Red Deer in Canada. Her son Adler followed soon after, daughter Ariella quickly after that. And these days, you are much more likely to see directions for freezing kale or the recipe for calendula salve on her Instagram than you are an image of her doing a handstand in a bikini on a beautiful beach. So let's dive in to my conversation with MacKenzie on change and transformation. Hello, MacKenzie. How are you?
Great. How are you doing, Rachel?
I'm good, thank you. I'm actually really excited to have this conversation with you. I haven't had a proper conversation with you since, I feel like, Thailand? 2018, pre-children, pre-you moving to Red Deer. So yeah, I'm actually really excited to kind of dive in and hear a little bit about what your life trajectory has been like. But we'll start, if it's okay with you, by going back to the sort of beginning of your yoga teaching trajectory, because I found out that we have some big similarities. Well, actually just one.
Oh, I can't wait to hear.
Just one similarity, which is we both did teacher training in 2011. So we've both been teaching for about 10 years. But within a year of your teacher training, you were doing photo shoots in New York with Catherine Budig and other yoga celebrities. And suffice it to say that I wasn't. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what drew you to yoga practice and what your practice was like then, back in the early days?
Yeah, I first found yoga. My first experience of yoga was in university. And like, to be completely frank, it was an ego stroke. I happened to step into just a stretching class, and the instructor naturally gravitated towards me because, as you know, my body leans to the extremely mobile side of the spectrum. Naturally, I could never stretch a day in my life and still be able to put my foot behind my head, and which isn't necessary for anyone to do. I think ever.
Public health disclaimer.
Yeah. And so anyway, I enjoyed it because mainly he was like, wow, look at this young 17-year-old. Of course I was flexible. But it didn't really catch me. At the time I was a personal trainer and group exercise instructor. So I just liked to move my body and feel good. And then after university, I got cut off parents' payroll and had to get a 9-to-5 job. And I was fortunate because at the time I was living in Los Angeles, and My boss and the company I was working for was, I thought, pretty progressive. They paid for our gym membership. And if
Mm.
you worked out during lunch, you got extra lunch. And so
Mm.
for me, like, I didn't really like sitting behind a desk working all day. 15 less minutes of that, I would have done anything. And so I started taking every class offered at my gym at noon. Like, I would just, any class that was there, I'd show up. And so I happened into a yoga class, and I fell in love with my instructor. She was a new teacher, but you could just tell she was super passionate and really cared. And she was like, "MacKenzie, you shouldn't be doing gym yoga. You should come to a yoga studio with me." So I went into Yoga Works, which, at the time
Yeah.
was a really big chain of studios across the nation eventually, but specifically in Los Angeles, and just fell in love. I was exposed to still some of the greatest yoga teachers around the world,
Mm.
one being Catherine Budig, Annie Carpenter, Vinnie Marino, the list could go, Chad Hammerin, on and on and on. And I started practicing every day, all day, like 2 times a day if I could. Um, Again, I had nothing but time besides my job, so why not?
Yeah.
And I just immersed myself completely. And after probably about a year of consistent practice, I decided, like, I should be doing I should be doing this. Like, had been a personal trainer. I love movement. I love empowering people in their body. Like, I should go for teaching yoga. And so I decided to move back to Seattle, which is where I grew up. And at the time, I was like, Catherine Budig, do you have any recommendations of a teacher training I should do? Because I hadn't really found a teacher training that I felt like I aligned with. And she was
Mm.
like, "Oh, you have to do Tiffany Cruikshank's teacher training." And so I looked her up, and I was like, wow, she looks incredible. She
She
at the
can do
time
some
was
crazy
based.
stuff as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, headstand with no hands, I'm in. um, and so anyway, I looked her up, and she was running a teacher training out of Portland. And uh, so I joined and met Tiffany and fell in love. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, likely you know who Tiffany is. um, and it was love at first sight on my end. I can't speak for Tiffany, but I uh, I just fell in love with her teaching methods
Mm.
and her philosophy behind movement and health and wellness. And
And this was
um,
pre-yoga medicine, wasn't it?
yes, it was Tiffany Cruikshank yoga at the
Mhm.
time.
Did you kind of
And
feel any differences then with the teaching style versus now, or does yoga medicine just feel like
oh,
a development of?
dramatically.
Oh, okay, yeah. Carry on then.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's similar to my path, and probably because she's my teacher, I
Mm.
follow her path, slightly, but it was strong vinyasa flows mostly.
Mm.
And then I noticed she started shifting, and she stopped, like, demoing fancy poses. Those fancy poses started slowly disappearing, and therapeutics entered, and it just felt really, lovely to me,
Mm.
and feels like, or felt like what I needed more of.
Mm.
And as you mentioned, my personal life started getting pretty chaotic. Um, I was moving around a lot, traveling
Yeah.
the world, teaching, myself
It kind of felt like
eventually,
this
and
happened really quickly for you, or at least from the outside,
yeah,
that it looks like within a couple of years of you doing your teacher training, you were traveling the world, like literally the world, not just,
yeah.
literally traveling the world, teaching yoga workshops and running retreats and doing photo shoots. And it seemed like you had this really massive uptick, and at the same time amassed a really engaged following on social media. Do you have any kind of tips or any insights on what created that social media following?
It I mean, mine was right time, right place, as you mentioned. So that was like 2011 and 2012, as you kind of briefly mentioned. I was part of Catherine Budig's The Big Book of Yoga, alongside with Tiffany and other world-renowned teachers. Like, I had a complete imposter syndrome. I'm like, why am I even here? I literally just finished my teacher training. Like, why did Catherine ask me to be a part of this?
Could have been the foot behind the head thing.
Yes, it has something to do with being able to like feed myself grapes with my toes from behind. Was a big part of me joining. But I started getting really, it's funny, that trip was in to New York was in 2012,
Mm.
and Instagram had just kind of started. I remember using it on that trip to edit my photos. Like, that was the only way I'd use it because it had cool filters. And
Ah.
then shortly after that, I was like, I should start maybe using this app more. And in, gosh, it was probably around 2013 or 2014. I had been posting consistently for a while, growing a following. And then when the video feature went live, it was originally 15 seconds. And I had at the time, because there were no videos, I was doing tutorials for poses. So I was like in one picture posting like 9 little pictures to describe how to enter into a photo. So along comes the video feature. I was like, oh, this is amazing. Now I can show 15 seconds, like get as much in
Get really in
15 seconds as
depth.
possible. Yes, very in depth. And I was like one of probably a handful of people who were doing yoga, advanced asana, I should say.
Mm.
We're doing advanced asana in video form on Instagram.
Mm.
And at that time, everyone saw the same explore page as well. Any Instagram user, you open up the explore page, you see the same, whatever, 9 posts.
Wow.
And when I'd post a video, it would automatically make it to the explore page. And I started gaining 1,000 followers a day. And so that escalated pretty quickly.
Ah, that's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a luck of the draw when it
Mm.
comes to some social media. And then there's also like consistency is key
Yeah, I mean,
and
you obviously
engagement with
still
your followers.
have a really large following, even though you're no longer posting advanced pose tutorials. So there's got to be something else that they're coming to you for that isn't just that.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, similar to how I've evolved with Tiffany, I think my followers have evolved with me. That
Mm.
was almost a decade ago. And, we were all probably around mid to late 20s then and now.
So you feel like,
Um,
in terms of social media, you were offering the right thing in the right place at the right time when everything sort of conspired to build this following. But of course, you still have a really large following. So you've obviously stumbled across or maybe deliberately created something that's more long lasting than that.
yeah, I think that, specifically about 5 years ago, like when I first got pregnant with Adler, my
Mm.
first child, um, well, I guess it was more around his birth that well, maybe even before that, I met Mike
Yeah, so that's kind of
in
where I was heading next. If it felt like
2015.
you were on this pathway of the international traveling yoga teacher and trainer and the jet set glamorous lifestyle that I think many yoga teachers, at least at the time, I don't know if that's still the plan, but many teachers at the time were aspiring to. And then it felt like all of a sudden, here was Mike. And I don't know why you fell in love with him, but I know why I fell in love with him. It was when he was recreating your Instagram photos. That was when I was like, that guy's my
He's the
forever.
one.
He's the one.
Yes.
So yeah, talk a little about that and about your decision to move to Red Deer, Alberta, out in, I mean,
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful rural Canada.
Yeah. So at the time, I was traveling nonstop in 2015, and I happened to take a teaching job in Red Deer, Alberta.
Ah,
And the truth behind it was that the only reason I accepted this job was that Tiffany had taught at the studio before. So it was like, got to be kind of legit if they brought like another internationally traveling teacher. And I accepted the job and came and I taught in Calgary Friday night and Saturday night, and then came out to Red Deer Saturday night and Sunday. And in my Saturday night class, Mike was the only male. It was my like at that time my like classic backbending workshop,
mhm.
and backbends tend to attract a lot of females, and so it was like Mike and a whole bunch of females. And I did my thing after class. We always kind of laugh because all the students had left, and I'm just like not a big small talker.
Mhm.
I have a really hard time with it. And so I come out of the studio, and here Mike is standing. Everyone else has left. And I'm like, why is this guy still here? Like I'm like small talking, trying to like what's going on. And then the studio owner comes out and it's like, oh, this is Mike. He's our local farmer and he also teaches yoga here. He's going to come to dinner with us. And I was like, okay, not just like a creepy guy. And we went to dinner that evening and just hit it off. Like, hit it off in the way that neither one of us have game. So we were like flirting ineffectively and like wanting to bump knees under the table, but we're like too nervous. Like, we're in our 30s and like still don't know how to flirt. Um, and so I went home to the hotel room, and the next day I was teaching another class. Um, and then flying to New York to help with one of Tiffany's trainings. And that was that. I was like, I guess it was just a missed connection. And I arrived in New York, and in my DMs, Mike slid into my DMs and we started talking, and I had a strange break in my schedule because of the Zika virus. I had had a retreat planned in Brazil, but it had to get canceled. And so I had this strange break where I had like 30 days I wasn't going to travel, and we were like, should we just try to see if we like each other? And so I came up to Red Deer and stayed for a month, and the rest is history. We just can't get enough of each other. And yeah, so at that time was living in Los Angeles. So I moved to Los Angeles to Red Deer, Alberta,
Wow.
and basically could not change my life more. Um, if I'm being completely honest, like my life had taken a momentum that just didn't really feel like I had control over.
Mm.
And going to a place where I had to drive over an hour to get to the airport sounded really enticing. Like maybe I would not have to travel as much if I couldn't travel as easily.
Yeah.
And um and it gave me time to like uh sit with like what kind of teacher did I really want to be. I was still teaching a lot of the fancy tricks and contortion stuff, but I had started falling out of love with it.
Mm.
And so it was a nice needed break to kind of shift a little bit, and I slowly started changing. changing what I was posting and giving myself permission to not be an Instagram celebrity
Mm,
posting fancy yoga asana, because that's what people expected from me. And so in a way, it's what I expected of myself. And
mm.
it was like, either I can do what people want or I can do what I want with my life. And so I started making slow and steady changes.
Did it feel like there was, whether an internal or an external pressure, now that you had this amazing following, you had the thing that so many people wanted, did it feel like there was pressure to keep it, to maintain it, to keep it up? Or did you feel stronger, those internal forces going, I don't know that I like where this is heading. I don't know that I like how this feels.
Yeah, there started to be like, as my following grew, I felt a real responsibility. One, in what I like put out there, because
Mm,
it really influences things. Like, they call it an influencer for a reason, and
mm,
specifically the yoga community. So if all I'm doing is putting fancy asanas out there, what I'm saying is fancy asanas and fancy leggings are what matter.
mm,
And the truth is that neither of those matter, in my opinion. And it started weighing on me, and when I started having kids, it weighed on me even heavier, like, as an influencer. It's like, what am I putting out into the world? And what seeds am I planting for the future generations, not only of yoga practitioners, but of humans?
people.
Like,
Mm,
am I being an example of someone that I would want my kids to be? Well, I hope my kids are far better than I am, like tenfold. But it's like, am I planting the right seeds here?
mm.
And if I was being honest with myself, no, I wasn't. Like, I was kind of just going with trends um, and following some money. And um, I decided that didn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, um, I want to be proud of what I do, and that required change. And
Mm.
so
And you
I started
mentioned
making it.
your pregnancy and Adler, and I think people who know you or at least follow you will know that the pregnancy went to plan to a certain extent until it didn't, and then birth was
Yeah.
definitely not what you'd anticipated. Or so, yeah. Talk a little bit about how that changed things for you, and you can go into as little or as much detail as you feel comfortable with. But that felt like a real shifting time for you.
Yeah. I was pregnant in 2017. I was due December 20th of 2017. And as you mentioned, I had a fantastic pregnancy. I felt so good my whole pregnancy. I loved being pregnant, and I was still traveling a lot. I was traveling to teach, and I had decided to take a bit of time to travel for myself. So I went on a retreat to Iceland with Janet Stone, and like 25 weeks pregnant was like on icebergs and like just having so much fun. And I had known, because like, when you travel a lot, you have travel insurance and you kind of know these things, but I had known that my travel insurance would cover my pregnancy until I was 32 weeks pregnant. And then after that, they stopped covering you. And so I was mindful and was like, okay, perfect. I will travel up until 32 weeks. And then those last 8 weeks of the pregnancy is when I'll figure out like how to have a baby. And I,
To-do
my
list:
last
figure
trip,
out how to have a baby.
yeah, I like figure shit out. That was like my to-do list, like start reading all the books. Um, and my last trip of my pregnancy was to Germany. It was a 5-day trip. Like, at that point in time, I was like traveling for efficiency. So we'd
Mm,
left on a Thursday and would be back in Red Deer by a Monday, like a super fast trip for a quite long flight. And Mike like basically never traveled with me for work. It was pointless. He'd just sit there while I was working the whole time.
Mm.
But being really like late-ish in my pregnancy, there was something in my mind that was like, I just don't feel quite right being that far away from him this pregnant.
Mm.
And so I had bought him a ticket and he was like, I just don't understand why I'm coming with you on this trip. Like, you're going to be working the whole time. And like, there's literally no this turnaround time. Like, we arrive and then we work all weekend and then we fly home. Anyway, I won, as I think a lot of women do in marriage disputes. And he came with me to Germany. And for those of you who know how this story ends, no, it's a good thing, because we arrived in Germany. We had a day where we could kind of explore. We were in Hamburg and we walked around a lot and just like had a great time. Saturday, I was teaching 2 classes at a yoga festival, and it was like really strange because like I just felt like I started leaking. Like, I was peeing myself. I was like, "Oh, I'm pregnant. I'm just peeing myself." Like, that's what happens, right? That's like, again, I haven't looked into this whole pregnancy thing very in depth, but I think it's normal. Like, I'm pregnant, baby's heavy, like I just started leaking. But it was like starting to be an amount of fluid that I like wasn't feeling comfortable with, and I was getting concerned. Like, I had taught 2 classes, and I just was like, I should probably check in with my midwife back in Canada. So I called back home and she was like, well, if you were here, we would go to the hospital and just check that it's not amniotic fluid that you're leaking. And this was at like probably 11 p.m. in Germany, because after my classes, we had gone out to dinner and with some other teachers. And so Mike and I were both like, okay, sure, we'll go to the hospital. So we just got in a taxi, went to the hospital, like casually as if it was a normal thing to do. We get there and like funny, the nurse, she was like, oh yeah, I was supposed to be there today at the yoga festival, but I ended up working. As she's starting a vaginal ultrasound, and like just like a lot of fluid started gushing, and she's like, yeah, that's your amniotic fluid, like you are full on not leaving the hospital. And I was like, what?
But I'm teaching tomorrow.
um but I've got to fly home and have this baby in 8 weeks. What are you talking about? Like, are you talking about I'm not leaving this hospital? And so then the strategy is like, in general, if you have any sort of amniotic sac rupture, to that early, 8 weeks early, um, is to try to prolong labor for as long as possible. Give that little tiny human as much time inside as possible safely. And so I just was being monitored nonstop. Lung development is really important at this point in time in the pregnancy. And so they give you steroid shots to speed that up for the baby. And about 5 days later, I started showing signs of infection. And so they were like, we don't know where the infection's coming from. And so, like, you could labor this baby, but here we don't. Like, you're going to have an emergency C-section. And again, I was like, what? Like, but I'm having this baby in Canada in 8 weeks. Like, I don't think you understand my plans here.
Mm.
And so we had Adler in Germany. And Adler is the German word for eagle. And so he was always our little eagle. He came flying out with strength, and we're very fortunate. He was so strong and so healthy from the get-go. But that was the beginning of a huge life pivot for me, and a lesson in letting go of control.
Yeah. And I imagine there's a
And
big difference between the changes that you felt you wanted to make that were kind of coming from the inside, and then this sort of started a cascade of things that were not your plan, not what you had in mind, and kind of came from the outside. So I bet they felt quite
Yeah.
different for you to adjust to.
Yeah, I had a pretty open approach to my birth. I don't even like using the word plan
Mm,
because I just don't feel like you can really plan too much.
mm.
But this was a huge pivot.
Oh, totally. I
Like,
mean, 2 months early is it 2 months early, wrong country.
so yeah, it was a lot.
Mm,
And being almost 4 years removed now, like I can look back and see how traumatic it was.
mhm,
And that like, I mean, I wanted baby to be safe. That was most important to me,
mm,
is that he had his best chance of survival and health and to thrive. And I was kind of like, I'll do whatever they recommend. And it, yeah, it took a lot of time and processing to kind of wrap my head around like just what a crazy experience that was. And I think, well, because of that, a lot of things changed in my life. Um, we knew we wanted more than one child, and so we started to conceive again. But because of Adler's birth, my insurance wasn't so keen on covering my pregnancies outside of Canada anymore. Not sure why. Maybe it was being medically evacuated back to Canada from Germany.
probably
I don't know.
expensive.
So yeah, it was I'll happily pay for insurance for the rest of my life. Um and yeah, so they stopped covering me. And so there was like I I had two pregnancies that didn't make it to full term. And so I started having to like really pivot because I used to travel and
Mm,
teach, and I no longer was able to travel. Um, like I just felt my life was so unstable. Like I
mm,
would plan gigs, and then it's like I'd get pregnant and then I would miscarry. And then it was like, well, I'd have to cancel gigs and then I would have to book them again. And I started just being like, why am I doing this? Like just stop and pivot, do something new. And so I feel like I was ready for COVID. Like my life had already pivoted like 2 years earlier. I was like well prepared for this. Um, and yeah, I just really learned to embrace change.
mm,
And a big change was motherhood. Like
mm,
a large part of my identity was being an internationally traveling yoga instructor. And when I stopped doing that and I started, my title was more mom full time than anything. Um, I dealt with a lot of like not so pleasant emotions and
mm. I was
like
going to ask you
resentment
about
and
that, whether you had defined yourself by the image that was on social media or whether that was something that came from other people. But it sounds like you had to some extent identified with who you were seen as and what your body could do, and I guess that's changing through the whole journey of being a mother.
yeah. And yeah, it just I started it's been really nice, to be frank, because for a long time I'd meet people and a lot of time people already knew who I was
Mm,
and had an expectation of me. And like it's very strange. And it's like I was putting a lot out there on social media, so people felt they really knew a lot
yeah.
of me and knew who I was. And um it's really it's a very strange position to be in when people feel so connected to you and you have no connection to them. And
Mm.
so it was nice to pivot and like connect to my child and spend that time connecting to myself and focusing on like what does bring me joy, like who who do I want to be in this world, and how do I define myself, and just really allowed all that to be my primary focus.
And you said to begin with, it brought up some unpleasant emotions. So, what was the sort of beginning of that process like before you got to the what do I like and what's important to me? What were the sort of unpleasant emotions that were coming up as you were forced to redefine yourself?
Well, a big part of it was my like my ability to earn income
Mm,
had changed dramatically, and so there was this kind of idea of who I thought I was, and what I was able to do, and changing that, like, I don't know, I'd got really caught up in like how much money I could
yeah.
make, and
Even just the strong,
and
independent woman thing. I look after myself. I make
yes,
my own money. Yeah, totally.
and yeah, and that's it started changing, and um frankly, it's like a really liberating thing to like make less money
Hmm.
and realize like, oh, I don't need a lot of money. I don't need a lot of things.
Mm,
That's not where my joy comes from. And it's like, do I like making money? Of course. I really enjoy making money, but I now know that that's not that's not who I am.
mm.
It's not
It's
a
it's kind of
definition of
a
me.
privileged thing to say, but I do feel like everybody should be poor at some point in their lives, with the assumption
Yes.
that you're not going to have to be poor forever. But it really does help you figure out what things actually matter to you and what things do bring you joy. If you only had $5, where would that $5 go? It really does
Yeah.
give you information that you don't get when you're on the hamster wheel of earning and spending and earning and spending and earning and spending.
Yeah. And then there was also the aspect of becoming a mom, and um like I said, Adler's birth was fairly traumatic. The first
Mm,
6 weeks of his life, he was in the hospital, and I was in the hospital with him. Like we shared a room, and Mike Adler and I all shared a room in Germany for 5 weeks, and then we flew back to Canada, and he was in the hospital here for about a week and a half. And then we went from this very monitored daily schedule of like, you feed him this amount of milk on this hour, every 3 hours. The nurses will check all of his vitals. There's machines beeping all the time, to being home. And then, like, it's like, well, I was working with a midwife, and I had wanted to try breastfeeding, but to get Adler out of the hospital, he needed to be able to take a certain amount of milk in a day to gain weight, to make sure
mm,
he was, as they say, thriving. And so then he comes home, and we're like trying to breastfeed, and I'm like, how do I know how much milk he's getting? I can't measure the milk as it's coming out of my breast, and it was super stressful, and like it just really it, I understand, like, postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression are very real, and
mm,
I was overwhelmed by anything and everything. I couldn't get anything done, like, at all. It was beyond my capability, and so it was just like I didn't have time for to make be making lots of social media posts. Like, I just couldn't do it. Like, I could not manage to shower, let alone, like, make posts about asana. Like, I just couldn't be bothered. So, I mean, it's kind of a blessing to have had my focus shifted so dramatically, and I'm grateful that I reached out for help. So I started seeing a therapist to help me
mm.
process Adler's birth and process being a mom, and then subsequently processing miscarriages and
Mm,
processing life. I think everyone should have a therapist in
mm.
their back pocket for when times are going good and when of struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember reading a post of yours where it was about Adler's birth, and you were saying that it was only later that you realized how much postpartum anxiety you'd had. And I think that's common for a lot of the events in our lives that really challenge us. At the time, we're just doing what we need to do to get through to whatever we think the other side will be. And it's not until we have a bit of perspective that we look back and realize how much of an impact events had, and how barely we were clinging on by our sort of fingernails. So do
Yeah.
you think that's common to other periods of change and transition in people's lives, that sometimes there isn't clarity until down the track, a bit of space has passed?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's like a low, it's like almost like a low grade vibration,
Mm,
an anxious vibration I like to kind of think of like a sheet, I don't know, of glass that has holes in it, and there's all these like balls on top, and it's shaking, and they just take some time sometimes to find that holes
mm,
and fall through and be like find where they are supposed to be. Like my therapist is always like, our brain likes to organize things, and I know that you're about my age. And so it's like in the library when you wanted to find a book when we were kids, you'd go to the catalog, open it up, and it's like everything had its place. And that's how our brain likes to function. It
yeah,
likes
the
to be
catalog.
able to put things into catalogs and
Mm,
categories, and our brain's the same. And so when we have all these things, these just different events, and it can be little, it doesn't have to be something big, like having a baby 8 weeks early in a foreign country.
mm,
It can be like bad interactions with someone that just like doesn't get processed, that you're just feeling. And
mm,
um I think that sometimes we don't realize how much like that little bit of unsettledness um, takes up a lot of our energy.
mm,
And I think it's really normal that, like, throughout daily life, sometimes not big traumatic events, that
mm.
people are having a hard time functioning well or
Yeah,
feeling joy, feeling happiness, particularly in 2021,
yeah.
after having people have been going through a lot for the past almost 2 years. And
Yeah, basically the
yeah.
experience that you were having of planning events and then having to cancel them, that's been pretty much the last
Mhm.
couple of years for most people in the world of, and
Yeah.
we're okay with dealing with bad news if we know what it is. It's the unknown of, can I, will I, if I plan this, will it happen, or will something else happen? And I have a very visual brain, and I now have that image in my mind of the sheet of metal with the little holes, and there being a couple of errant balls still vibrating away in the back of my mind, using up energy that could be spent on other things, including just knowing how I'm feeling in the time, not just not experiencing joy or happiness, but not
Yeah.
even knowing how I'm feeling. Am I joyful? Am I happy? Am I anxious? Yeah, that takes a bit of energy to process and figure out, doesn't it?
It does. It takes time and awareness and
Mm,
a desire to investigate, because it's not pleasant always
nope.
sitting with how you really feel
Mm,
about something.
mm,
And it's hard for a lot of people to communicate what they need out of other people in their lives or out of their life.
mm,
And when I had Adler, I started journaling again consistently. One, because I just wanted to like have a way to look back at like what happened. Like I had a lot of time too. Like I was in quarantine. This is the
mm.
funny part. I was in quarantine in a room. Like I was locked in a room basically. Um so I just journaled a lot. And guilty pleasured rewatched Gossip Girl as my way to disassociate from what was
Now,
happening.
here's a question. You don't really feel guilty about that, do you? You enjoyed it. It was so
No,
why
I
do we
don't.
call it a guilty pleasure? Why isn't it just a pleasure?
Yes, I 1000% agree with that. This it wasn't even guilty. It was like a necessary coping
Yeah,
mechanism of
escape.
checking out.
Totally.
Yeah. And yeah, it's but no, guilt is not something I feel much of in
No,
my life
I'm not a
because I
guilty
try to make
person either.
intentional decisions.
Yeah.
Like if I want to eat a plate of nachos, I'm going to eat a plate of nachos and enjoy it.
Yeah, with great
And
relish.
then also eat kale salad. Balance.
So
All
you
about
don't
balance.
just have Adler now, you have Ariella as well. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that journey in itself was different to the one that you had with Adler. Kids all seem to come out straight away so
Mhm.
different. So how has that changed over the last kind of year and a half of now having Ariella in the picture as well?
Well, I mean, it's been fantastic. We kind of joke that it's like, man, here we thought having a baby 8 weeks premature in a foreign country would be stressful. Enter the coronavirus when I was like 36 weeks pregnant with
Oh,
Ariella. And I was like, I just was laughing every day because it's like, here I thought I had like really mastered not gripping to a plan. And it's like, well, now every day I'm checking in with my midwife. She has the sniffles. Now she has to quarantine for 7 days. Who's going to deliver my baby?
mm.
Where is my baby going to be delivered? How? Like, when? What? Why?
Can Mike
Like,
be there? Will you
will
be by
Mike be able?
yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like, it was really intense for a few days. And then I was like, this is what's happening.
Mm.
Like, I can't control the regulations of the hospital. It's out of my power. And so all I can do is sit with the things I can control.
Mm.
And thankfully, having practiced for yoga for a decade had really empowered me to like, one, I often have verbal diarrhea to Mike. It's like I'm having these really irrational thoughts and feelings. I just have to say them so that they're out. They're
Hmm.
done. Again, it's so that it can settle. It's gone. And it's like these are my worries. These are my concerns. Like I think there's so much power to like processing things either out loud
Mm.
verbally if you have someone you feel safe enough sharing your most vulnerable thoughts and feelings with,
I hope
or
everybody
writing them
has that
down.
someone.
Yes, I do too.
Mm.
But also writing them down is incredibly powerful to be able to process and analyze and see those thoughts in a physical form.
I think this is why in
Um,
horror movies they rarely show the scary thing until the very end, because
yeah,
the nebulous, partially imagined thing is always more powerful than giving it shape and form, which then gives it boundaries. And you can look at it and go, I mean, that could happen, but it's not likely to happen, or that could never happen because, yeah, giving them shape takes some of their power away, I think.
yeah, I 1000% agree. Um, but having a second child definitely made me realize how much I had experienced postpartum anxiety
Mm.
because it's like with one child, I should be able to get way more done than with two children. But I found the opposite to be true.
Yeah.
I felt like way more capable. Second time around, it's less scary. You kind of know what to expect with babies. And you're more relaxed. Like you're like, I got this. I've managed to keep one small human functioning. Um, what's another one now? And so it's just been a delight. As you said, they're like completely different personalities
Mm.
right out of the gate,
Hmm.
and they're just so much fun. I like love being their mom. It's my greatest. It's so cliche. All the things about parenthood are like so cliche and so true, but it's like just my greatest joy every day to see their little faces and watch how they experience the world.
Mm. So you've shared a little bit of their faces and a little bit of their experiences on social media. Did you kind of think about that beforehand? Was that, I'm sure it was a deliberate decision given that it's you, that you wanted to show a little bit of that aspect of your life?
Yeah, I with Adler, I shared a lot more of his face and of him. I've pulled back on that a bit. I still share photos of them or with them, but a lot less frequently.
Mm.
And I'm really deliberate about not sharing their experiences of life.
Mhm.
Um, it's like this is our my experience of these activities, and try not to share anything too personal about them because I don't know, like I don't know how kids are gonna feel
Mm.
looking back in 15 years and then being like, oh my gosh, mom, why are you posting all these naked photos of me? Or why did you share so much? And
Yeah.
so I'm more tentative about sharing specifically about them than I have in the past. But
Mm.
I try to find the balance between sharing the experience that is life and my human experience,
Mm.
and
And they're
that
a huge part
heavily
of it.
involves being their mom
Mm.
and relating to people that way without like um, putting them out there
Mm.
in a vulnerable position.
And what's your relationship with social media like now that you've settled into quite a different rhythm and routine? You're not traveling as often and your focus is quite different. And I imagine your work hours and your work routine are quite different now too.
Yeah, Mike and I chose for our family that for almost like for the first 4 years of the kids' lives, that I would be their primary caregiver. We are incredibly privileged that that is a circumstance that we're able to do
Mm.
and is what we want to do. And so my work hours, like I've got about 6 hours a week
Hmm.
um, without the kids in the house. And then I do a lot of stuff in the evening. But that was one of those like shifts I made in my mind. It's like, you
Mm.
know what? There's so many years of my life
Yeah.
to be incredibly productive. Um, there are limited years in my life that my kids are young and want to be around me all the time.
Hmm.
And so I'm going to relish in that and be present um, in their experience and try again to model behavior of a human I want them to respect and like. And so a lot of that has to do with not being on my phone a lot
Mm.
in front of them. Like I intentionally, they don't get much screen time
Yeah.
at all. They actually get no screen
Yeah.
time.
I totally get that. I even noticed this with my dog, where if my partner and I are both sitting on our phones, I'll glance up and he's just looking from one to the other. And I can only imagine how magnified that would be if you're looking at a human who's watching both their parents looking at their phones and not looking at the other people. What enormous that would be, like a giant sort of universal mirror reflecting your own behaviors back at you and thinking, is this what I want for them?
Yeah.
What's good enough for me? Is that good enough for them? It's probably not. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
how do you
There's
reconcile that with keeping some level of presence online? Because you still do have a pretty large and seemingly engaged and interested following. How do you balance those two pressures?
oh, I don't do it well. That's, um yeah, that's the truth is I'm not doing it very well. But as Ariella gets older, they will both go to like a we call it their school, but a little daycare
Hmm.
for 2 days a week. And so eventually that will be my work time. And it's about working smart. So I try to work smart for my business,
Hmm.
for my personal goals, for our family goals wisely. So generally Sundays I meal plan, I
Hmm.
have my workout plan, I've got my business plans of what I'm going to do on what days and when so that um, my life doesn't fall apart.
So you're creating as much intention around it as you can. And then when life inevitably intervenes, maybe you don't get 100% of it done, but you get 80% of it done. And that's still
Oh,
better than zero. Yeah. No, totally. And then you've been posting recently about being back into a sort of workout routine, that your body feels ready after Ariella to start challenging it again and running and working out. So do you want to talk about that at all, and how that's been for someone who's been fit and active, it seems, their entire life?
yeah, it's been humbling having 2 kids. Um, I remember when I was a personal trainer training people and they're like, I can't do a sit up." And I'm like, I was in my 20s, but I was like, "I don't understand how you
Just try
can't do a
harder.
sit up. Just sit up." Like, the name is the indication of what you just need to do,
Mm,
and I realized having had my abs stretched and then, just deflated, um, how challenging it is to, like, rebuild that strength,
mm,
and I just wanted to be really kind with myself and
mm,
gentle with myself, and again, model healthy behavior for myself, for my daughter, like, body stuff is something I've
mm,
become super conscious of. Um, Having a little girl watching her mom and, like, I want to show grace. I want to show myself kindness, but then I
mm,
also want to take care of myself. And so I did a lot of PT work and that was more on the gentle side, lots of fascial work. Um, but then, like, my 2 physios, they're like, "Mackenzie, your tissues used to being, like, pushed and stressed, like, you could probably amp it up." I'd, like, probably stay in PT world forever if it was up to me. I'm like, "Oh." People are like the gentle don't like the gentle stuff. They're like, "It's so boring." I'm like, "It's so nice." It's such a break. Um, so I started, like, I don't know, it just happened, but we have another family living out on the farm with us, and it's like a mom, and she has 4 kids, and she was doing this exercise program and then had stopped and then got back into it, and so she's like, Would you wanna do it with me?" And so I was like, "Well, sure, why not?" Like, because, I mean, it just worked out because she's got kids who are a little bit older. So I'm like, it's perfect. When we're working out, she can watch her kids can help watch my kids, and I can, like, be consistent with working out. And something I haven't been able to do because I again don't have childcare. I have 6 hours a week to myself. And so I just started and it just reminded me how much I love strength training, and
mm,
strength training is vital for my body,
mm,
that being that my tissue is lax to begin with, and then add the hormones of pregnancy and breastfeeding, and it's like I'm just like a wet noodle. And so strength training, it's like it's empowering and also to feel good. Like when you're hauling kids around all the time, it's like
mm.
you can just start feeling kind of like the hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm like, start like, oh, look in the mirror. I'm like, oh God, oh, that's me and my shitty posture from breastfeeding for 4 years. Um, yeah, I just started doing more strength training and have just been loving it. It's
Mm.
just making me feel it's making me feel strong again, and like
Yeah.
also like, wow, I can commit to something. Like it's easy for me as a mom to be like, I don't have time for an
Hmm.
hour workout, which it is hard to fit in, particularly if I don't have childcare. Um, but we just make it work. And like, as I said, my kids don't get screen time. So I was really hard on myself about like doing a workout with the TV on to follow,
Hmm.
and having Adler be there. But it's been really fun watching the kids. Like, I try to mostly do it when Ariel naps, but she's like a little workout fiend. She like does down dog and three-legged dog and is like always on her back, like it's like stretching her legs and like doing glute bridges, and like it's so funny. And Adler's like mostly interested in like the people. He'll be like, he knows everyone's name that's like on the workout videos and is like
I
very
love that.
invested in their story. It's funny.
Oh, I love that. So, to kind of wrap things up, from your experiences, what advice would you give someone who's in a period of change and transformation, whether that's job or location or just how they see or define themselves? What advice would you give them from what you've been giving yourself, I guess?
I think to really sit with the change and transformation
Mm,
and like write down like what can I control? Like what are my what actions can I take to help drive the results I desire? In this specific time, there's a lot of things that a lot of us can't control,
mhm,
but there's still so much that we can. And taking care of yourself, specifically, most importantly, your mind, um, including practices in your life like meditation, journaling, breath work, things that will help down regulate your nervous system
mm,
are super empowering. If you are in like a really elevated state, like if you're experiencing high amounts of change, it's stressful on your nervous system. So
mm,
just incorporating practices, even like baths or hot and cold exposure, are all fantastic things. Those are practices I implemented before I could really swing back towards the yang side of things.
mm,
And like when I started creating more pliability in my nervous system, I felt more able to cope with the more change and more stress that life threw at me.
mm. I love that. So, a little bit of time to be kind and quiet and thoughtful and reflective before you started that. Here's what I can do about it, to give yourself some reserves to draw from, perhaps. I love that.
Yeah, if you don't like, you don't take the time to sit and think about what you want or why you're unhappy or why you're
Mm,
struggling, like how are you ever going to make change that has the effect you are desiring?
yeah.
So you just have to take that time and give it thought. You deserve it. Like we all deserve a
Mm,
life of fulfillment and and joy, and then also the ability to cope with the inevitable
mhm,
struggles that come with being human.
mm. I feel like I've had a therapy session, even though even though I don't have kids and don't ever plan to and don't ever want to. I've really enjoyed our
I
discussion.
also feel like I had a therapy session just yammering on.
Clarifying some things by talking about them. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing so generously from your experience and your expertise. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that people will enjoy listening to our conversation. Thank you, Mackenzie. If people want to
Yes.
find you or find out more about you, where would you send them?
MackenzieYoga.com. If you just Google Mackenzie Yoga, as you experience, you can learn more about me than you'll ever desire in
Yeah,
this
she's
lifetime.
pretty easy to find. I did an extremely creepy deep dive on the internet. So yeah, Dive in there, people. You won't be disappointed. Thank you so much, MacKenzie.
Thanks so much for your time, Rachel.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.